I'm in a New York state of mind.
Welcome back to the John Fredericks Show. That was Billy Joel, New York State of Mind. Brings us right up to our next guest, Renn. Aaron is from Manhattan Institute, and he writes for the City Journal. And I have Aaron on the show today because Aaron writes a great piece on July 25th. He wrote a piece on Eye on the News, Paul Krugman's bubble. So I just thought that Billy Joel will just go perfect with it. Aaron, welcome to the John Fredericks Show. You're on with Colonel Mike and Dr. Scheuer.
Thanks for having me on.
Aaron, thank you. I know you're out of your New York environment and you're probably on vacation, but come on, tell us a little bit about this. I've read this 3 times. It's just wonderful. You know, this guy lives in a bubble, and everybody just looks at him like some kind of an idol worship or a god. Tell us about this article. It's so good.
Right. Well, I saw a blog post that Paul Krugman had over at the New York Times where he was criticizing people for feeling fearful about crime and about the economy. And he's like, if you want to feel good about America, just do what I did. Go out for a jog in Riverside Park. And so Riverside Park is on the Upper West Side of New York. It's the other side of the Upper West. Central Park is one side of Upper West Side. Everybody knows Central Park. Riverside Park's on the Hudson River. It's the other one. It's a gorgeous, beautiful park. You know, the Upper West Side is, you know, it's where I live, full disclosure. You know, many, many wealthy hedge fund managers, many, many political donors. You know, life is definitely good on the Upper West Side, but this is so totally unlike any other place in America. I'm just like, what does this guy think he's saying? You know, it's like saying go for a jog in Beverly Hills. You know, take a stroll down Rodeo Drive if you want to think America's doing great. Maybe he should get out in the field more. So I felt compelled to respond to it.
Thank you, because I am familiar with what you're talking about. We used to say when I lived in New York, that was the limousine liberals. You know, NBC, CBS, all the network guys lived up there too, you know. Sam Donaldson.
Oh, yeah, well, you know, this is definitely a media neighborhood. I live right by ABC's studios. They're only like a block from my apartment. But for me, I grew up in rural southern Indiana. You know, for a time, I actually lived in a trailer on a gravel road. I grew up 4 miles outside of a town of 29 people. And a lot of my work has focused on Rust Belt and post-industrial cities. So I spend a lot of time traveling around America and looking at the other side of what's going on. And it's not quite as good as it is in places like New York.
Well, yes, I agree with you. And, you know, Krugman's always lived in some kind of a people look at him, you know, he won, what is it, Nobel Prize or Pulitzer Prize or something like that, and like he's an idol worship. You know, the guy's an imbecile in a lot of stuff that he writes, and most of the liberal stuff picks him up. But you wrote a perfect piece. I mean, it hits all the points about why people should be gloomy. Well, it's obvious. That zip code, you know, they don't have gloomy days.
Right. Yeah, well, I think part of it is there is a lot of prosperity in much of New York. Some of it came from very good decisions. I mean, the crime has gone way down in New York because we've had excellent policing, starting under Giuliani, continuing under Mayor Bloomberg. Crime went down and down. And when this, you know, very liberal mayor, Bill de Blasio, took over, to his credit, he brought back Giuliani's original police commissioner, Bill Bratton, to run the police, who just announced, now Bratton just announced his retirement. So there have been good policies that have been implemented here, but it's also the case that the federal government has done a lot. It keeps bailing out Wall Street. I mean, Wall Street money fuels a lot of what's going on in New York. And when you've got TARP and you've got too big to fail and you've got quantitative easing and you get all these things that are designed to make sure that, you know, it's heads I win, tails the taxpayer loses, you know, no surprise things are pretty good in New York.
You know, in your article, Aaron, Mike Scheuer here, by the way, I couldn't help thinking that Paul Krugman could have been attached to the court of Louis XIV.
Right, exactly.
In the last years of the reign, before the revolution came, and I'm being very surprised someday when he becomes a persona non grata to people who are tired of having, as you said, wage stagnation forever.
Well, I think it's an interesting analogy. You know, hopefully, you know, things are not as bad in the U.S. as they were in France. I find it interesting how many people seem unwilling to admit there's any sort of a problem. And, many people have. I mean, in both liberals and conservatives, people like Charles Murray at the American Enterprise Institute, he wrote a book, Coming Apart, about the problems in the working classes. He's the one that talked about the bubbles. He's the one that invented this bubble concept of people who live completely among the world of the elite. But also liberal Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam, he wrote the book Bowling Alone.
Yes.
He wrote a book, Our Kids, that made the same argument. Things are great at the top. They're not so good at the bottom. I do think it's a complex situation. It's not all economic. Some of it's social. The drug addiction. When I was a kid, you could be a yahoo and drive drunk and do a lot of things like that. Today, you can get involved in heroin, prescription drugs. There's things available today that weren't there before. It's not all economic, but there are economic challenges. And I'm surprised that people would rather demonize those who are complaining about what's been happening to them rather than taking stock of the situation.
I think that's exactly right, and I also think the whole bubble thing. You could go to young people and their ability to live within their computer and social networking kind of would be shocked by what has happened to this economy in the last 20 years.
Mike, in his piece right here, he's talking about Marissa Mayer from Yahoo.
Yes.
Here's a loser, and her accomplishments in buying the worthless tumbler, $1 billion. What's her parachute going to look like, Aaron?
Well, she had pre-negotiated severance of $55 million.
Wow.
If she left. So I don't know exactly if she negotiated that on the way in or somewhere along the way. But a lot of these CEOs basically have, prearranged golden parachutes in case they fail. So unless they're fired for cause, like for stealing or for fraud, they're basically guaranteed that they're going to get a nice payday at the end. Now that, again, Yahoo was a tough situation. I mean, we got to give her some credit that was a very difficult turnaround situation. But, nobody forced her to spend over $1 billion on a worthless website like Tumblr. She made a lot of very bad decisions. And, this is much like Wall Street getting bailed out when the market crashes. It's the same thing. These corporate CEOs fail and they get a golden parachute. There's no golden parachute, for the average person whose company goes under,
Hey, Aaron, can you tell the listeners about the Manhattan Institute?
Yeah, well, we are a public policy think tank in New York. We're very much believers in, individual initiative, responsibility, free markets. I work on urban policy and what cities should do. But we have quite a collection of scholars there that work on any number of issues: education reform, policing, energy and the environment. We don't all agree on every topic, but I think we're unified by that unifying philosophy, if you will.
Mike?
How do we do this peacefully, Aaron? We have an entire elite in both parties that, for the most part, don't get it. They talk about the wage stagnation. They talk about too many wars. They talk about all kinds of things, but nothing ever changes. And I'm not one that believes that Americans in the long run are just going to be cattle and sheep and walk themselves into this kind of a almost police state when you get to the point of it. If they're going to continue to bring in illegal immigration, and if they're going to continue to try to redistribute wealth, it can only lead to violence, I think.
Well, we have a deeply divided country and a sort of winner-take-all mentality of what to do. I think in this environment, maybe the most stable thing we could do is, devolve more decisions downward to state and local governments to say, look, if California wants to implement very, very progressive policies, they've got the freedom to do that. If Texas wants to take a more that, and then the marketplace will decide, because the progressives claim that their policies are better, and so the marketplace will bear that out if it's true. If it's not true, we'll find out. Instead, what's happened is once you get control of the machinery in Washington, you start to use it to try to impose your vision on every single person. And when there's not much unanimity of opinion on topics in America, that creates a lot of political disruption. So we probably need to reinvigorate our federalist system in the near term in order to alleviate some of this, or it's going to be more of the same.
I think you're exactly right. When politicians talk about we're all Americans and that's fine, it's true, but this is a country of extraordinary differences in regions, in political attitudes. When you say this is one country, true enough, we're all in the North American continent. But when you look at the bestsellers in fiction, when you get away from vampires, it's a lot of guys who write about regions. Ivan Doig on Montana in the Northwest. Tony Hillerman on a detective in New Mexico. Pat Conroy on the on the Carolinas, and was it Richard Russo on upstate New York? The demonstration of the strength of those kind of books is just, you should tell politicians that people need to be governed by the people closest to them.
Right. I mean, I don't want to get myself elected president and then use my power to force people in San Francisco to do what I want.
Right.
Let the people in San Francisco do what they want. If they want to be, very, very liberal, then they can do that. And by the way, they're all complaining that nobody can afford to live there because the prices are so high. But that's the reality, right? That's the choice you make. That's the freedom you have.
Yeah.
The marketplace will help enforce rational decision making.
Absolutely, it absolutely will. And the market will respond differently in different regions to different policies, which is exactly what you want.
And what you see in places like San Francisco is especially among these young millennials, even many people who are far to the left politically, is they're almost taking a libertarian view towards housing development. They're like, wow, we need to reduce some of this regulation. What do you mean I can't take an Uber? What do you mean I can't sell the baked goods I made in my home? What do you mean I can't do all these things that I want to do to have my artisanal pickle business? So I think there's been much more of a sense among some of them of the regulations affecting them personally, maybe in a way that they didn't before, and you're seeing some blowback on it.
I hope you're right about that, because my general impression of so many millennials is that they feel as though they're entitled to something, whether it's a free college or a guaranteed job. And they seem to have such little contact with reality. Maybe that's because you can't work your way through college anymore because the government and universities have made it so expensive. But there's just I don't know if it's a naivete or a selfishness or a combination of both among them that is very disturbing for the people who are going to run the country someday.
Well, as a Generation X guy myself, I mean, everybody likes to kind of roll their eyes at the next generation. I'm sure kind of my parents did it about me. I will say the term millennials was coined in 1992 in a book called Generations. Guys named Strauss and Howe wrote it. They had this archetype of 4 repeating generational patterns. And they basically said the millennials were destined to be the new greatest generation. They were going to save America. They were going to be more moral, more everything, more selfless, more civic-minded. So I think effectively they've been told, as Obama famously said, we are the ones we've been waiting for since basically birth. And so they've been raised with very, very high expectations that the economy in the world is not delivering on. So it's understandable that they would have some cognitive dissonance. They've been basically lied to. They've been lied to a lot.
Well, of course. Well, that's that whole generation thing. The idea that the World War II generation was the greatest generation is just a piece of Tom Brokaw insanity. The founders were the greatest generation. The next was the Civil War generation, and maybe World War II comes in third. But you're right. You give a sense of entitlement to people like that. Where the pros from Dover have arrived and there's no jobs for us and we have to pay for our college. What are you talking about? It's just a madness.
Right, and I think that's one thing that if I were going to deliver a message more to the conservative side that I think we got to realize is we're not in the 50s and 60s either. We're in competition with these people around the world, in China, in India. When I did worked in the IT business, I worked with people in those countries. They are good, and they are hungry, and they're working hard, and we have to earn our success in the global marketplace every day, too. So we have to work hard as a country. We have to pedal hard, and we have to stop shooting ourselves in the foot on a lot of things. Certainly, we need to get our act together, But just because we're the United States doesn't entitle us to success either. We have to earn it again every day, just like those other generations that you mentioned earned it in those other times of crisis.
I think that's exactly right, and I think that's one thing that should be said to all Americans, is that the United States has no God-given or anybody else given right to exist. We exist as long as we are in contact with reality and kind of, as you say, compete every day, not only at home but abroad. And no one says that. We spend money, we form policies, we go to wars, as if somehow there's nothing we can do that can destroy America. And it seems we're well on the road to that now.
Right? Well, we've certainly made a lot of bad decisions, that's for sure.
Aye, sir.
Well, Aaron, it was great to have you
It
on
certainly
the show.
was.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, we hope to have you back on. Do you have a website or a blog or something?
Or a book?
Yeah, you should check us out at City Journal, city-journal.org. That's the magazine of the Manhattan Institute.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron. Appreciate you coming on the show. Hope you have you back again.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.